Hey everybody, I know many of you have been looking at all the socials, you've been looking at all that's been happening in the country regarding the very process of the budget. Now, I thought it was important for me just to give you our own reflections on what took place on the budget, why we voted the way we did, what we voted for, and what we hope to achieve. South Africa is clearly in an economic crisis. It's clearly in a fiscal crisis in that you're running a budget deficit of 5% every year. And by most people's acknowledgement of the budget is that this is not a budget that would serve the interest of all South Africans. It includes a 5% deficit, as I've already indicated. It also includes an increasing in the debt spiral. And when you look at where the issues sit, they don't always sit on the revenue side, they sit on the expenditure side in what we prioritize spending on. The second point I want to make is that South Africa is not unique in that it is interlinked to the rest of global markets. Now, I'm not here to say that the markets are the government. I'm merely here to say that if you want to improve revenue, South Africa's greatest crisis is what is called the gross capital formation, which is the rate of investment. In other words, we're not attracting enough capital into the country for people to invest so that we could be able to, A, create the requisite jobs, but have the fiscal wiggle room to ensure that we could spend on certain projects. And notwithstanding the need for energy, the need for water, and the need for infrastructure. So that is, in and of itself, a crisis that sits within the budget. The third issue is that we've got a legislative process, a problem, in that many investors say South Africa is difficult to invest in because the laws that you have are complicated. Now, if you were to look at all of those things and then say to yourself, the moment that we're in now, what do we need to do? Yesterday, as a leader, I had to confront these choices. I have been very vocal about the fact that I am against any increases, and I still maintain in VAT, and I still maintain that no country taxes itself to prosperity. I think a VAT hike naturally is a corruption tax. It's a tax that was effectively saying, we stole money over the last number of years, now you have to pay for it. So given that, what then do we need to do? It is clear this is not a good budget. So if it's a choice between good versus bad, then it would be an easy choice. Yeah, do not support or support. That's good versus bad. But the choice we had to make was not that. The choice we had to make was worse or much worse. Now let me tell you about what is worse. Worse is the current status quo. Worse is the fact that things need to get going regardless of the imperfections of the government. Worse is the fact that we actually need a budget we can amend. Much worse is what the political posturing has become. The political posturing was, let's go to court, let's posture in parliament, let's delay processes. Let me tell you something. Regardless of whether I think the fiscal framework is good or bad, and I've already given you an expression on that, a country without a budget is well on its way to becoming a banana republic. 2 days before the vote, were you to reflect on the market conditions, you would have seen a complete wipeout of billions of rand lost through our stock exchange because there isn't a confidence that says you have a government that can pass a budget. There isn't a confidence that says if a government can't pass a budget, how can you invest into it so that it can pass laws that work and it can look after you? So we must then, if that is the scenario we wanted to see, well, we would have no room. We'd have no room to negotiate. We'd have no room to be able to make the adjustments we need to make. And we'd have no room to grow the economy that we desperately need to focus on rather than this one particular aspect of the budget. So the choice we made was about standing up and saying, let us be adult about it. Let us be responsible as leaders to be able to go, we are making choices that say we are here to protect the interest of South Africans. And I said it even yesterday in the budget speech that I'm willing to work with both the ANC and the DA. Because this is not about the reconfiguration of the GNU and trying to find a position. This is everything to do with the fact that always stand up, make responsible choices that serve the people of this country. And whilst that's hard you might feel like it's contrary to the fact, given that there's this 0.5% increase, you might think, but how is that in the interest? I tell you what, starting with a fiscal framework means the budget comes to the Appropriations Committee, and then we can really begin to do the hard work of changing things within that. The tax bill is also coming. And the beauty about where Bosa sits at the moment is that our votes, in many instances, hold the balance of power in how the direction goes. So let me speak to you about what we're going to use those votes for if they are going to have more significance and more currency. We are going to fight harder to reject this issue of the 0.5%. The 0.5% is 13.5 billion rands that will go into the fiscus, which means if you want to cancel that, you have to figure out what you do on the expenditure side and focus on funding expenditure that grows your economy. So there are a couple of things I want to suggest. The first is we have a super cash injection into the National Empowerment Fund. We, according to the E&E, say it's a 20 billion rand, which means that we can begin to adjust that figure. If we were to take it over the medium term, we could ultimately ensure that we lose or we don't need the 13 billion rands into the revenue side to be able to fix for. That's but one component. We've already, as the Appropriations Committee, started to interrogate the spending reviews and ask the questions, where is money being spent, so that we can begin to spend more effectively and alleviate wasteful expenditure wherever it occurs. The third dynamic of this issue is that we've got to look at fixing municipalities, and this is where it's crucial. If you are going to spend 1 trillion rands over the medium term on municipalities, we have to then make sure that that money is spent with capable and competent municipalities. Nelson Mandela Bay was allocated money where ultimately it did not have the capability to spend on a bridge for 89 million rand. Where Nelson Mandela Bay has already had to write off 3.2 billion rands on fruitless and wasteful expenditure. These are things that cannot continue, and they manifest themselves in the tenders that were issued. The total number of tenders that were attempted in Nelson Mandela Bay were over 268 tenders, of which there were Electricity and Energy Department, there were 30 tenders, Human Settlement Departments, 54 tenders, Infrastructure and Engineering Directorates, 163 tenders, Public Health Departments, 3 tenders, and Sports, Recreation, Arts and Culture Directorate, 36 tenders. If we don't deal with the competence, just that one municipality alone, we could have saved 3.2 billion rands. Now, the Auditor General makes it clear that we lose 52 billion rands in municipalities through wasteful and fruitless expenditure. So the work we've got to do is, I wonder if we took that money, as I've already been saying, and went to an institution like SAICA and said, give me your graduating accountants so that I can employ each one of them and make sure each of them can be able to be deployed to municipalities. It would save us that 52 billion rands. But that's not all. There are a number of interventions that we are going to put forward, even in the Appropriations Committee. For example, that when we look at even Eskom, we can look at how effective that is being managed and its debt management program, so that we don't exacerbate the issue of borrowing more money as a bailout towards Eskom. We as Bosa have been advocating for the rationalization of SOEs. And I want to tell you, I think there's a deeper interest in this matter happening bilaterally between us and even the African National Congress. We want to be able to change legislation, like, for example, the equitable share formula in how money is allocated more specifically to the closest sphere of government to you, which is the municipality. So there's a lot more work that needs to be done in the fiscal framework. But I guess what's more important is that we've also got to look at growth initiatives. I am a deep, passionate advocate for transport. I think that transport is an enabler. It helps shield the poor South Africans from adverse effects of economic inflation. It means that if people can get to work cheaper, be able to deal with this question of multi-dimensional poverty, which is, it's not just food insecurity, but it's about being able to get to work, it's about being able to get to hospital if you need to, or getting to school. We can be able to ensure that by funding an effective passenger rail system, By increasing signaling there and making sure trains work, people can get to hospitals, schools, and other services. But we can also ensure that logistics work across the country. I have proposed that we fund the NPA and the SIU. If we fight hard to slash the cabinet, we can ensure that we give that money to making sure that NPA can prosecute those who have stolen, so that there's justice for these lots of work that have happened. So yes, we may be a few in Parliament, but our votes are going to matter in advancing that. We're going to focus on growth initiatives that say, how do we stimulate SMMEs? And then to come back, lastly, to the revenue side, I've already spoken about declaring online gambling as a sin tax. That could contribute close to about 80 billion rands to the fiscus if we declare 6% sin tax on online gambling, which means punters would have to pay. This is nothing unique. This happens in other sports betting, whether that is in horse racing or in other spaces. So there is innovation. So let me say to every single one of you, this is the first leg of 3 in the budget cycle. Next, we're dealing with the Division of Revenue Bill, which will come to our committee, and we've had public hearings to have this discussion. Secondly, we're going into the Appropriations Bill, which each will then have to vote according to the various votes that take place to make sure ultimately we have a budget that works for you. Fellow South Africans, it would have been irresponsible for me as a leader to not have the fiscal framework go through. It would be even more irresponsible of me to not fight for the expenditure cuts that will make sure we reverse VAT. So I want you to come with us. As hard, as uncertain as the next number of months or weeks are going to be, but make sure and know I am committed to make sure that we have a budget that works for you. And Bosa has always stood to say we'll be the voice of the people. This is not about reconfiguration of the GNU or any of that. This is about serving the people of South Africa. You're it for me, and therefore I want to make sure I earn your work, your word, so that we can make sure we deliver a government that works for the people. Much love to all of you, and I'll see you soon.